We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
Is an ideological arms race for the Supreme Court on the horizon with the November 2024 election? Well, we're going to find that out today when we're speaking to Mr. Scott Cosenza, Liberty Nation's legal affairs editor. Welcome back to the show, Scott.
Cheers, Mark. Thank you. My pleasure.
So, Scott, everybody remembers when Donald Trump put out a list of names of potential Supreme Court justices. Now, I know that I was enthused by the fact that that would be there, and I know you were, and many
people. Of course, but just set the table for those who don't know. Before the 2016 presidential election, he put out a whole slate that a large group of judges that he said this is the pool from which he would select his justices from. It was remarkable. Yes,
it's remarkable because it's unprecedented. I think nobody's done it before. Now the question is, of course, as we're approaching the 2024 election, and this will be Donald Trump's third time around the block, does he still have a list in place? Is that list appealing to people who have a judicial bent? Does it appeal to them? And is it something that Joe Biden's going to emulate?
Well, I don't think Biden can emulate it because he's already made his case that he will only appoint justices who agree with him, basically. And so the specific identities of those judges aren't terribly important, I think, for, putting on my political analyst hat, sort of his voting block. He's made the reinstitution of abortion rights guaranteed by the federal government a cornerstone of his reelection campaign. I don't quite understand what he means when he says he's going to enshrine Roe v. Wade into law because, of course, Roe v. Wade is a court case that is no longer a valid precedent from the Supreme Court. So how do you enshrine that into federal law? That doesn't make any sense to me, but it's clear, I think, for him to communicating to his potential voters what he's about. The Trump thing, I think, was terribly interesting because there's so many different ways a person can be a quote-unquote sort of conservative judge, and the specific kind of views that they have about what the court's business should be is of vital interest to many thought leaders on the right. And I think it assuaged their concerns. You got to remember, Donald Trump was a really unknown as to how he would
politician,
govern.
yeah.
And the Supreme Court decides all the most important issues of our time. Taxes, literally the very nature of what is life, when it can be extinguished or not. And every other thing. So it makes so much sense to me that any presidential candidate might say, hey, here's who I'm thinking of. But I don't think we're going to get names from Biden, in large part because all the people who might be on the Supreme Court for Biden will be working for the Biden campaign and double donating and everything else. So if their name's not on that list, it takes some of the gas away from, whose horse is in that race.
Yeah, that's a valid point there. So I think people are interested in what happens with the makeup of the Supreme Court precisely because presidents come and go, and the Supreme Court bench is a lifetime appointment, unless, of course, you're Stephen Breyer and you're politely asked to leave to make way for Ketanji Brown Jackson.
Well, I think Biden said in late May in Philadelphia at an event that he thought he would get 2 Supreme Court appointments, or the next president would get 2 Supreme Court appointments. So that's kind of fascinating. I don't know who exactly he thinks is going to go, but the older of the left bloc is Sonia Sotomayor, who's in her 60s, not terribly old for a Supreme Court justice. She's had some significant health challenges with public battles with diabetes and some other things. So maybe that's weighing on her, but I doubt, it's one of those roles that it doesn't require, 100-hour weeks for a whole year. They get months and months off at a time. They're wildly respected and revered, and she makes a mountain of money off of her book sales, which we've criticized in other forums. So,
well,
we'll see
Scott,
about that.
Maybe you've got the wrong end of the thread here. Maybe what Joe Biden meant was that the 2 justices that he might get to appoint would be to replace them on the conservative side.
Sure, Justice Clarence Thomas and Samuel Alito are
The two biggest enemies to democracy,
yeah.
according to
You
the
know,
left.
the funny thing is, if those two are as motivated by politics as they're made out to be by the
Mm.
left, then it's almost certain they would wait another 4 years
Oh yeah.
before retiring. We've had judges who basically phoned it in quite literally. I mean, they were in the courtroom for much of their experience, but also for the rest of the time when they weren't hearing cases, they literally perform their role as a Supreme Court justice from their island vacation residence. So we have a precedent for that. So it's not
Well,
like,
as you know, working from home did become very popular
yeah.
during the
Well,
pandemic.
I just mean that for if somebody was so motivated, it's an easy job to keep. I think you don't
Mm.
actually have to write anything. You can just vote the way that you want to with results. Now, that's not what we hope that we're paying the justices for. We hope we're paying for them literally the benefit of their jurisprudence, and it's good to
Mm.
see that on the page. But just in strictly, real politic terms, right? Keeping a seat occupied by a member of a certain philosophy, they can both do that pretty comfortably, I think, for a few years while they wait on another
I can just
opportunity.
imagine Justice Clarence Thomas riding around all 50 states in his RV, as he's wont to do, dialing in a Zoom call to give his opinion busting decision on things. And Justice Alito sitting under all the flags that his wife puts out, and typing in his decision on the thing. By the way, on that
The
message, I'm
Alito
sure.
thing is hilarious for people who don't know. He was criticized for multiple flags that his wife flew
Mm.
over their home, and it's funny. Uh, Proud independent women are de rigueur on the left, except if somehow a conservative member of the Supreme Court has one. Then all of a sudden, uh, they don't get independent opinions.
Let me take you a little further down the rabbit hole on this, Scott. I'm sure some of our listeners have heard this, but it's flown quite under the radar. So this was the appeal to heaven flag, which is essentially a pine tree on a white background. And some
Which
people
is a
on January.
classic flag of the
Hmm.
American Revolution, by the way. Uh, I own one. I've had one for many years.
I
It's a
believe it was
handsome
designed
flag.
by a corporal who served under General George Washington.
Yeah.
Now, there was quite the uproar that this would be flying over the home of Justice Alito because some people involved in the January 6th unrest were also carrying that flag. Let's forget the point
Some
that
tiny group of people adopted that flag for their cause de rigueur.
let's
Yeah.
bear in mind here, Scott,
Very
2 points
recently.
there. 2 points there. Number one, there were also the American flag being carried in that crowd. So
Yes.
let's not get too far in the woods. But do you know where else has been flying that flag for 50 years and only
Tell
took
me.
it down after these reports came out denouncing Samuel Alito?
I don't know.
San Francisco City Council. It's been in front of their building for half a century. Yeah, it's quite a twisting of narrative. Now let's get one more big question on this, Scott, on the Supreme Court. There's been a lot of talk about changing the majority through, well, let's call it what it is, court packing by appointing new justices. Now there's a process in place to expand the court, isn't there? If one were inclined to do so.
Yeah, the process is just federal law would change. It's not, you don't need a constitutional amendment or anything big like that. If you have both houses of Congress and the presidency, like the Democrats had for a short time until the Republicans, or rather the Republicans captured the House, they could have done it. Biden made noises like he was going to maybe make a move to do it. And I presume that they got some pushback from some folks on their side that they said that maybe they wouldn't support it, or the cooler heads prevailed that, if you went to 11, then the Republicans, when they got power, they'd maybe go to 15 or something like that with their own. And of course, then, never ending cycle. So either way, it didn't happen. And I think that the Republic is the great beneficiary of it not happening.
Scott Cosenza, thanks ever so much for joining us.
Thanks, Mark.
And that's about all we have time for on this week's edition of Liberty Nation Radio. I've been your host, Mark Angelides. I'd like to thank our guests for today and, of course, extend my thanks to you, the listeners, for taking the time to tune in each week and join us on the show. Thanks for being here. We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.